Hello again. Today's tips will be on blending colored pencils and fixing mistakes. Just to recap, this is the third video in a series of videos on colored pencil drawing. The first one dealt with picking out a quality reference photo to work from. The second focused on tracing your reference photo and where to start the drawing. So now some tips on how to blend colors, and I'll be using Faber-Castell Polychromos color pencils and Strathmore 400 series mixed media paper. I will be drawing an apple that is sitting on my desk here. Everything is freehand and I'm mainly using apple as a guide. To start, I draw the apple using Naples yellow. Once I have the general shape laid out, I add in some dark cadmium orange. I then add in some light green near the stem and the left side of the apple. For the red sections, I am using deep scarlet red. When drawing this type of apple, I'm using light strokes, following what I would describe as the grain of the apple. Light strokes arcing from the top of the apple down towards the bottom. Just a series of arcing lines. The center of the apple would have the lines going straight from top to bottom. With this first layer done, I now go on to apply a second layer of yellow. I'm essentially blending the colors now, but just slightly blending them. I draw in the stem of the apple using raw umber and walnut brown. I also blend in some light green to the stem. I'm using raw umber for the shadows produced by the stem. I add in the second layers of orange and red. I darken some of the red regions, mostly on the edges, with dark red. With most of the color laid out suitably to represent the apple, I can now start to focus on the final layers of blending with more pressure or burnishing the layers. There are a number of ways you can blend your final color. It really depends on what final color you want to achieve. For instance, with the yellow section of the apple, if I apply a final layer of Naples yellow, this would represent the section of the apple quite well. I need to make sure when I apply the final layer, I use enough force to fill the entire tooth of the paper, but I don't want to apply too much force since this may result in a broken lead. The Faber-Castell pencils have quite strong leads, and I have only broken one to date, and that was a white pencil and I was applying far too much force. So for the yellow, using the yellow as a final blending color works great. For a section of the apple that is reflecting the light source, I don't want to blend with yellow. I would choose white for that section. The Faber-Castell white is quite transparent. If you're trying to lighten up a section, you're better off using a Prismacolor Premier white pencil. For most of the drawing, I'm using the Naples yellow as my final layer. You can see that I am using in certain areas the Prismacolor Premier white pencil. There's another way you can blend or burnish the layers. For this, I have a Prismacolor Premier colorless blender. So if you're happy with the colors and you just want to blend them together and not influence them in any way, you can use the colorless blender. If you're trying to lighten up the colors, you might use a white colored pencil. If you really want to lighten up the colors, you'd use a white Prismacolor Premier color pencil. And it works the same way. If you're trying to darken your color up just a bit, you could go with a darker color. Typically when I'm blending in that last layer, if I want to go light, I'll use white or cream. If I want to go darker, I'll often use the main color represented in the drawing. So in this case, if I want to go darker, I would use Naples yellow. If I want to darken up one of the red sections, I would blend with the deep scarlet red. Lastly, you can use a paint thinner to blend your colors. In this case here, I have a Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. Generally, I would advise against using paint thinner to blend. I think you're much better off using pencils, colorless blenders, a white pencil crayon to blend. The reason being, paint thinner is toxic. If you read through the MSDS sheets, you can get an idea of the results of the product for when they've tested it on animals, typically rabbits and guinea pigs. So, although it's not a carcinogen, it's harmful if swallowed. It's an eye irritant, and it can lead to liver damage, kidney damage, lung damage. It's an odorless paint thinner, which doesn't seem like the right thing to do. If you have something that's harmful, if inhaled, typically you want to make it so people know when they're being exposed to it. In this case, it's odorless, so you can't really tell how much of this is in the air that you're breathing. So if you do opt to use it, I suggest using it in a very well ventilated place. In other words, don't use it in your room. If you do, make sure you've got the windows or balcony door open. That essentially covers all the methods I use for blending. Now I'm going to quickly address methods for fixing mistakes. The first method is using Scotch tape to remove pigment from the paper. So here you can see I've put the Scotch tape on. I'm using a colorless blender to apply just a little bit of pressure to the back of it, to the area where I want to remove the pigment. Then I slowly peel it off. If you've only used light pressure to apply your layers, this should remove most of the pigment. The second method for removing pigment is to use an eraser. Here I'm using the eraser to remove a bit of the shadow layer. And you can see most of it comes off. But of course I haven't applied too much pressure to it, so it's easy to erase. When you're using the eraser, you don't want to push too hard because we don't want to damage the paper with the eraser. For both of these methods, they don't work very well if you've applied too much pressure and pressed the pigment into the tooth of the paper. Now here, I've already burnished this shadow layer with the brown, so we can see that when I'm using the eraser or when I'm using the Scotch tape, I'm not very successful in removing the pigment. That's all for today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. I should be back in a week or so with some more tips or drawings.